to go where the truth takes him. Here's Robert.
From time to time, we do a little political healing here on the Robert Scott Bell Show. Of course, we integrate all aspects of life into the healing that has to take place. And we talk about restoring the republic. We talk about restoring liberty. And there are those who I honor and recognize and bring on from time to time that do that as well. One of those people is running for the Senate out of Texas to be a senator there. His name is Glenn Addison. We've had him on. It's been a while, but it's time to catch up because early voting is starting in Texas. And we have definitely acknowledged this man's let's say, commitment to the cause of liberty in so many ways. So let's welcome him back to the program now. Glenn Addison, welcome back, my friend.
Thank you very much. Honored to be with you.
Glenn, I understand you were on the Mike Church show there on satellite this morning with some interesting new news. I wanted to let the Robert Scott Bell Show audience in on what's going on.
Well, there are 9 of us running for U.S. Senate in the Republican primary, and it bothers me profoundly, as well as other people that are fervent, liberty-loving Texans, that there's an opponent, one of my opponents claims to be the Liberty candidate when in fact there's all kind of evidence that he's not. That's Mr. Ted Cruz, a true establishment candidate, nice fella, but his background shows a proven record of wanting to stay in the United Nations, ties to Goldman Sachs in numerous ways. Definitely not a person that is of the liberty mind that I believe that we should be, and certainly that we want in the United States Senate. I am openly saying I will fight this fight until the last second before voting begins. We've got to stand for liberty. We've got to stand on principles. We don't need to be compromising on matters of principle, and that, of course, is the U.S. Constitution. As you know, that's the foundation of our republic. And as I say all over this state, we've got a major crack in our foundation with these unconstitutional agencies and departments telling we the people what to do. Mm-hmm. And I am laying it out there, Robert, that we've got to abolish them, not reform them like Mr. Cruz wants to do. He mentions about 3 departments and agencies that he wants to get rid of. There are several times that amount that I want to abolish because they are not in the book, as I call the Constitution. And it disturbs me that people in the establishment wing of the Republican Party are trying to convince liberty-minded voters that Mr. Cruz is their man, when in fact, although he's a good man, decent fella, he is not a liberty-minded candidate.
Glenn, listen, I don't know the details of the behind-the-scenes campaigns here, and I don't claim to have any privy knowledge of it. But I do recognize there's a lot of battles for those who are standing up for what is right and true. In fact, those that have spoken out the most about the ending the Fed, for instance, have been the most marginalized candidates. And, of course, of all the Senate candidates there in Texas, I think you have been the most outspoken on the issue of monetary policy and the Federal Reserve. So it's not surprising to me that you have been marginalized even by the Republican establishment there. And
especially by the Republican establishment, yes.
Yeah, but that's not a surprise to me. That's why I'm having you on the program to talk about this. So, like I said, I can't speak for anybody else. I can speak for me. I have looked at everybody here, and I recognize also the conflicts of interest in my mind that I've seen with Cruz. So we want to establish there is a grassroots movement to liberty. There's no question about it. As we're watching Ron Paul around the country, gathering thousands and thousands of people everywhere he goes, despite the media maligning him or ignoring him, or a combination of the two. And on a smaller scale, if you could say that in Texas, I know that's hard to say in Texas, a smaller scale, but the same thing happening to you, and I would not like to see that continue. I want your message to get out there, at least for the people of Texas that listen to the Robert Scott Bell Show, to get behind the guy who's the real deal in terms of beyond even Tea Party, because we've seen some of the conflicts within the Tea Party as they have been corrupted and adopted or co-opted by somewhat of the establishment Republican groups.
Especially the Tea Party Express. They are totally in the tank with the establishment. I don't know if you heard, but they invited me to speak at this event that Ron Paul spoke at on Sunday, and then they uninvited me about 3 hours before it was set to begin. I went anyway, had numerous supporters in the crowd holding up my signs. It's just a travesty of what is happening with the Tea Party Express, trying to just plug their establishment candidate. And I will tell you that liberty-minded voters are awakened to it, because Dr. Paul normally draws thousands of people at any rally that he has in Texas. I don't know that there were more than about 1,000 people, and I'm being generous, in Austin at that event on Sunday. And Robert, I'm convinced it's because those people did not want to be giving support to Mr. Cruz, who they know got up there, and it's as if he'd been reading my notes. But I will fight for the ideas of freedom and Ron Paul's message, again, all the way through this primary. We've got to continue the battle to restore the Constitution, to restore our national sovereignty, and in my case, to restore the concept of a citizen legislator. As you know, I'm the only one in the race that's pledged in the spirit of the Founding Fathers to serve one 6-year term and come back to my day job like the Founding Fathers used to do.
Yes.
And so I will not back down to these establishment people. The common man's voice will be heard, and I am out there every day fervently seeking to convert more people and standing up for liberty and talking the message, preaching the constitutional gospel each and every day.
Well, and you understand the concept, as you said, of a citizen legislator. You go up into the Senate, and it used to be, before a specific amendment was passed, the Senate represented the states. Now it tends to represent international interests as opposed to the interest of the state, for instance, in this case, Texas. And based on what Cruz is not saying, or let's say not acknowledging or not committing to, like, for instance, pulling us out of the United Nations, you can see that his interest is not in Texas so much as it is some other agenda.
Absolutely. In fact, I've been with him at 30 some odd forums, and there have been a handful of those forums where he was point blank asked, will you get us out of the UN? And his answer is always no. And then he says, that phrase, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Well, I think that's not at all applicable for these entangling alliances with that beast that we call the United Nations. He wants to stay in it. He likes to brag about fighting the UN with regard to the Medellin versus Texas case, but yet he does not want to get out of it. And if we had not been in the United Nations when that matter arose back in the 90s and early 2000s, he would not have had to waste his breath or taxpayer money to fight that case anyway. So the fact that he brags about fighting the UN, then openly wants to stay in and not completely openly, only when he's forced to admit it.
Sure.
The same thing, Robert, with the Environmental Protection Agency, the biggest job-killing entity on the face of the earth. It is unconstitutional, and he wants to reform it. We need to abolish it. I'm a big fan of clean air and clean water, but we've got smart Texans that can make that happen for us. The other 49 states have smart folks that can make sure their air and their water stays clean.
Yes, that's a very important point, Glenn, bringing that back home to the states, because I just covered on Sunday more on the issue, and Texas is also a Gulf Coast state of the oil spill with BP there, and the fact that they're still using Corexit, a very toxic substance that only drives the oil to the bottom to suffocate out the bottom of the Gulf there. And in fact, there are natural options the EPA has already acknowledged that exist, but they refuse to allow it to happen because they're protecting the profits of BP and ExxonMobil, who actually not only caused the disasters, whether it be Valdez in Alaska or in the Gulf of Mexico, but they've come up with and profited by the remediation or so-called solution. They have an investment in the Corexit itself, which violates federal law. So we're looking to bring this back home to the states, where the states could make decisions in their best interest, which would be much more efficient and correct than a bureaucratic oligarchy like the EPA in Washington, D.C., accepting the payoffs, bribes, etc. of those like at BP, ExxonMobil.
Absolutely. Let me share with you what I'm hearing on the campaign trail also, Robert. People say to me that, what are you going to do if you've got a couple of states that are arguing with one another, saying, for example, if Arkansas says, okay, Texas, you're polluting us. Here, if you turn to Article 1, Section 8, there is clear powers given to the Congress to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. I just read that verbatim. And in my mind, we could easily set up a federal court of mediation between two states if that issue does arise. In other words, we do not need federal bureaucrats in our business about that issue. They can be, if there's a problem between two states, my example there is a good way to constitutionally, I believe, allow for it to be dealt with. And another thing I would say to you, I'm just a firm believer, Robert, in using simple analogies, okay? And I say to folks, let's use an agriculture analogy. You don't have to tell a farmer to take care of their land. The farmer knows that their land is what provides their livelihood. And so case in point is they nurture it, they try to protect it, give it the nourishment that it needs along the way. They vehemently protect their own land because that to them is the goose that lays their golden eggs. And I use that as an example with regard to the states, Robert, because in 2010, when that devastating oil spill that BP was responsible for took place, the coastal fishing industries and tourism industries of the Gulf Coast states was decimated.
Yes.
And what happened to the states? Well, their tax revenues dropped because people stopped coming to the beach. They could not sell those fish, and so their revenues took a hit. And so the states have every incentive to make sure that their environment stays clean, to make sure that there's no loosey-goosey oil and gas exploration going on. In other words, they have the ability to use common sense to regulate their own energy industry. They do not need federal bureaucrats in their business. The government, according to the Constitution, has got no business in energy. It's not in the book.
Yeah, very, very important points here. By the way, we're talking with Glenn Addison. He's running for to be a senator from Texas, and he is the Liberty candidate, in my humble opinion. And we are covering this. It's coming up. The early voting is starting in Texas. I want you to know, but also talking in a principled way about the relationship between the states and the federal government, as well as the people, the whole representative government kind of concept, which is lost. We talked about some of the, in fact, there's a very funny video ad that the Addison campaign put together, and I've got that linked up, and you can see two of the candidates in cartoon fashion, a la some of these Ron Paul ads, very brilliantly done. And so check that out online at robertscottbell.com in today's show notes, and we'll have it posted up in the social media as well. But if we talk about, I guess, the concept of coming back to this globalism, internationalism, and the conflicts of interest, whether it be Goldman Sachs and other candidates, there's so much going on right now, so much awakening as well, as we see. I'm just wondering how long it will be where Texas says enough is enough. I mean, we've had incredible movement back toward liberty, but how much are the people of Texas willing to be duped or fooled? Are they getting wind of this? I mean, you're giving me some insight is that there is some awakening there, but there's such a global or international and national push against a candidate like you who speaks out openly, for instance, against the Fed. Yes,
because, see, the key point is I want to audit and end the Fed. The Federal Reserve Bank, two of the three words are misnomers. There is no reserve, and it's not a bank. We've got to get back to a sound monetary policy. And so I am right there with Dr. Paul. And in a speech that I heard on Sunday, Ted Cruz, threw out a bone to those that support Ron Paul, talking about an audit. I want a hindquarter, and I'll give the people a hindquarter. This business of throwing a bone here and there, that's not sufficient. We need to audit and end the Federal Reserve and return to sound monetary policy.
All right, well, stand by. You got a few more minutes, Glenn. I want to talk to you on the other side of the break here. Glenn Addison's running for Senate in Texas. All my Texas listeners, you want to know the guy who I'm supporting. This is it. And we've got the link up to glennaddison.com as well. Stand by. More political healing on the other side of this break right here on The Robert Scott Bell Show.
The Robert Scott Bell Show. Rocking the health world through the power of radio. It's the Robert Scott Bell Show.
Continuing now with Glenn Addison, running for Senate in Texas, doing some political healing, talking about some of the basic, I guess you could say, the symptoms of the disease, which is a loss of liberty or a constitutional deficiencies, and the remedies, of course, reactivating what we call the lawful remedy, which is the Constitution, and that's on a state level as well as a federal level. But then again, there are candidates that are kind of deceivers. They'll pretend to play one side or the other. I covered a story a couple of weeks ago. It was funny. Adam versus the Man. Adam Kokesh interviewed a guy who was running for like Secretary of the Treasury or Treasurer in North Carolina. And he spoke a good game, ironically enough, Glenn, about the UN. He says, I hate the UN. I want us out of the UN. And you're thinking, oh, he's a good guy. And then Adam starts asking him about the Federal Reserve. And he's like, oh, the Federal Reserve doesn't create money out of thin air. Yeah, that's it, And suddenly you're like, what? So it was like almost a flip side of what we're hearing here, where this Cruz guy is for the UN, but maybe talks a little bit, but not really where we need to go. I'm questioning about this Cruz guy. Did he endorse Ron Paul yet?
He did not. I challenge him to do so. In fact, I challenge all the candidates, excuse my voice. Mm-hmm. I challenge all the candidates for U.S. Senate in Texas to do that because, I'm not going to cave in to the Romney camp until he actually has a nomination. We've got to stand and fight for liberty until the final roll call is taken in Tampa. Now, this business is saying, well, okay, I guess we lost. No. You stand up for liberty until the last man falls, because we have got to take this country back, restore the Constitution, restore our national sovereignty. These are issues that we should not be caving in on. We must fight to the last breath, and we must continue the fight until that nomination is indeed completely out of our reach. And until that vote tally, I submit to you that we need to be fighting, because we've got to have somebody at that convention that will be our voice to stand for liberty, that will say, hey, this business of just ignoring the Constitution has got to stop. This vast usurpation of powers, what an outrage that the federal government is stealing, as we would say in Texas, our liberties. And the Republicans are right there making sausage with the Democrats on a number of things that are taking our liberties, whether it's the NDAA. I could go on and on. This business has got to stop.
Yeah, well, we saw a lot of promise initially in the phases of the early Tea Party. Of course, we go back to the speech in Boston at the anniversary of the Tea Party. I think it was back in 2007, and it was a major event that kind of started this, and they called Ron Paul the godfather of it. But eventually, some people predicted that it would become a little bit co-opted and corrupted. They seem to be okay on some issues, but not completely there. And hey, wait, something happened here. People are controlling it again, pulling the strings from above. And that's why perhaps there was a reluctance, as you described, the low attendance compared to Ron Paul events on his own going to this Tea Party Express event. So, listen, I have high hopes, and I think they're very real in that even if we don't win every election or only win some of them, the fact is this movement's not going away. It's different than before when some candidate would run because they were for themselves. This is a movement that's way larger than any one person, way larger than just Glenn Addison, and that's why I like you, Glenn, because I know you're running on those principles as opposed to just promote yourself.
Absolutely. It's something that my heart is so heavily burdened about, and I'm asking common folks like me. As I tell people, I'm a common man, but I've got some common sense, and I'm asking fellow ordinary Texans to join ranks with me. Let's join together and take back our country from the establishment elitist mentality that's been leading us down this path to destruction. And we're on this slippery slope of our liberties being taken away, one after another after another. And if it continues, Robert, we are doomed. We have got to stop this bleeding. We've got to restore our liberties. And the only way to restore our liberties is to restore the U.S. Constitution, which right now is being shredded on a daily basis.
Well, we're here with you to do that, Glenn. I certainly appreciate you dropping by after waking up early to be on the Mike Church Show. We're all for you, and if anybody would like to support or find out more, go to GlennAddison.com. We have the links up at RobertScottBell.com, Glenn.
Thank you so much. I was honored to be with you. Take care.
The Robert Scott Bell Show.